Well, this is Austin Gardner welcoming you to the World Evangelism Podcast. I want to bring another discussion to you about mentoring, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to do just exactly that. As we get started, I have shown you this before, the Are You Called booklet, and it's now been updated to 60 pages or so. 50-something pages of material and a checklist that can help you as you decide how far you lack, what all you need to do from where you're sitting to be ready to go in the ministry that God's called you to. I'd also like to show you, if my wife will hand me a copy of the book, I'd like to show you a copy of the marriage book. It's available also, and I'd like to invite you to get a hold of it. So the Are You Called book, and then this is just out. Let me see if I can get it where it looks good on the screen. But it is The Ultimate Guide to Building a Healthy and Fulfilling Marriage, Strategies for Forgiveness, and Grace. I didn't quite get that in the right order. But there it is. I'd like to invite you to get a copy of that book. They're both available to you on Amazon. Just look up W. Austin Gardner as the author, and you'll find those two books. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some successes when you're a mentor, and then I'd like to talk to you about some failures and just kind of go over some of that with you briefly today. One of the most exciting things in my ministry is that I have watched men that I have trained, both North American English-speaking men and Spanish-speaking men, plant indigenous churches that can go on and continue to do the ministry that God has for them. By that, we believe whenever you're discussing missions, you have to define your terms, because you'll hear about people that plant 300 or 400 churches in a year, and you'll read about that and you'll say, how in the world is that possible? Well, I think a lot has to do with how you define terms. So I use a term that comes from a guy named Nevins, made very popular by Melvin Hodges, who was an Assembly of God pastor, who wrote the book on the indigenous church. And the other book that's very famous and is always discussed by everyone is by Roland Allen. And Roland Allen was an Anglican. But the book has a great message in it. John Nevins wrote it, I think, the first time. And you talk about the indigenous church, it's self-supporting, self-propagating, and self-governing. So it's a church that can make its own decisions, pay its own bills, and can reproduce itself. And that's not necessarily a biblical term, but it is a term that you'll have to decide as you build and plant churches, and as you train men, you'll have to decide, what does a term mean? Because if you don't define your terms, then it's a very vague conversation. So I've seen men start churches that are doing all three of those things, and I'm excited about that. I've seen the people that I've had a privilege of training become strong and capable leaders. I've seen them reach the point where they were able to train others to do the same ministry that they were doing. I've watched the different missionaries in all different parts of the world learn to adapt the truths to the context, to the place where they're living. That's one of the most exciting things you could ever see in planning a church, because missionaries have to learn the Bible, and they have to learn a language, they have to learn a culture, and then they got to learn how to bridge that gap from one to the other, so that the people in the area that are listening to the message would understand all that's going on there. So that's exciting to watch them take the gospel message of Jesus Christ and apply it in a way that works in different people's lives. So what's really exciting is I was able to train Peruvian men, especially, that were able to start churches that have been funded by believers and that are doing their job. And those men have now gone in other places as missionaries. We have watched churches multiply rapidly as we train people who train people who train people. And so it begins to spread and carry on. It gets to a point where, the people you train, they're making decisions. I was in a pastor's meeting in Peru one time in the city of Arequipa, and I was offering a meal to all the pastors. And you had to be a pastor in our team to be able to come to that meeting. And so I'm walking around, the room is full. There are probably 30 or 40, 50 tables full, 5 or 6 people, everyone. It's just everybody's eating. We're having a good time. And I'm going from table to table shaking hands. And I get to this one table, and I can see further down, there's a couple of people I don't know. And so I'm like, well, what are they doing here? They've kind of horned their way in because this is for pastors on our team. And when I get to the table, a pastor I know says, hey, I invited them because, they're out of my church. And we started a church with them. And they're pastoring now. And I was like, wow, blew my mind. I didn't expect it. I wondered what they were doing here, but what a privilege that God would raise up people like that. What's beautiful is as you train people, some will go way above and beyond what you're able to do. And that is one of your successes. You're watching them change from you to something that they can do that's even more. But just let me tell you that there's some problems and failures that I see when we discuss being a mentor and training men. Sometimes you can train men that will become overly dependent on you. They need you. Sometimes, if you're not careful, you can impose so much of your own training in the place where you're from so that you could make Western cultural trappings take over the ministry that you're trying to train them to do. Sometimes, another danger is that you'll try to move too fast. What you want to do is to see a bunch of things happen. You want to see a bunch of men trained, and so you'll move too quickly, and the people you're training won't be ready for the ministry that you throw on them. That'll cause them to get discouraged and to leave and to quit. And so, you want to understand that. And then if you're not real careful as you train men, they're beginning to make their own decisions. Some of them will even embrace non-biblical things you didn't teach and don't believe. Some of them will develop moral, ethical failures. I've dealt with that. I've dealt with men that literally basically tried to steal church properties. I've dealt with men that have fallen into immorality and everything else, and it becomes a massive stink when you have to deal with that. But that's part of it. One of the dangers is that there will be a big argument about who's really in charge here. So many mentees are upset and angry about you having leadership over them. So you got to be really careful when you're training them. You want to be careful also that you compart the biblical vision and not just your vision, and then you let them go forward doing it the way they feel God would have them to do. Maybe one of the hardest things of all to do is to pass the baton and let the other person go on and do the ministry. That's hard because you want to be the center of attention. You want to be the guy. You don't mean to want to be. You're not trying to want to do that, but it's just a part of what happens. Now, you're going to train men, and some will struggle, and some will fail, and some will succeed, and some will go on beyond what you're able to do. That's the way it works. Some thrive, and some only survive. You're going to start and train men that'll never get a church above 50, and you're going to train other men that may go way above and beyond anything you've ever believed or dreamed of. If you travel across America, you'll find that most church auditoriums are just a couple hundred people, 180 to 250 people, because most churches will never be very large. And so we know that when we're dealing with people and when we're training people. You need to know that you and the people you're training may face outside persecution and opposition. As I started training men, I was constantly almost the laughing stock of the other missionaries. They told me I was wasting my time. They said that by dealing with these people, I was wasting my time. And when you're training people, it takes longer than it does to do it yourself. And when you're doing that, people may think you're not getting the job done. Then there will be things that are conflicts between your culture and the culture you're training people for. And if you haven't learned to bridge that cultural gap, and if they haven't learned to get to a spiritual position, it can be quite difficult. And so we have to go and train men. And some of them are going to leave us and do the opposite of what we've trained them to do. And I think that's pretty hard to deal with, but I think you have to be honest and you have to know that that's a possibility as you train men, that not everybody will do what you train them to do. So let's discuss real quickly what it means when you're training men. You know, you start with a vision and you start with a burden and you're really concerned. I wanted to reach Arequipa, and I didn't even really want to reach the whole city. I was working in a place called Hunter, and that was really pretty much all of my goal and all of my heart was to reach in that area. But as you start to build relationships and you gain some trust and people start allowing you to be there and you're in there on purpose, God begins to open some doors as you train people. They helped me learn the culturally relevant way to communicate truth. I could speak truth and they could help me see and understand how truth was going to work in their society. And I began to see lives transformed and churches started and things happening. People were coming together into new fellowships and churches are being formed. And we started doing discipleship, and I was discipling guys that were discipling guys. Then we began to identify local leaders. You know, as soon as the guy walked in the room, I was like, I believe that man might have it. He might not even be saved yet, but I could see that there was leadership there, and I prayed God would save him, and I began teaching and training. And those guys then took the ministry and went on forward, and it became their church. I've been gone for 30-something years now, and the first church I worked in is still going, and God is blessing that. And I'm so excited about what he's doing. And your churches make disciples and continue to do great works for God after you're long gone. But you need to know that as your churches grow and as people start coming along, you will stir up more, shall we just say, unrest and opposition and people not being comfortable with what you're doing. It's one thing when you got a little small church on the corner of nowhere, and it's another thing when your church really starts influencing your community. And people are threatened. They're threatened by your church. They're threatened by what you teach. So people mock you and persecute you, and they try to make attempts to stop you. We hadn't been going long, and the people in our neighborhood began to say that people were dying around the church because I was there and because of what I was teaching. Another time, a religious leader stated to the community that I was selling organs and got all the parents to not let their children go to our church. You'd be amazed at what ends up happening when you start doing some of the work that God's called you to do. And it's going to call for your courage and your faith and your perseverance to stand and not quit when things are going wrong. Over in Morocco, people have been arrested and put in jail. In China, people have been taken by the police and actually physically beaten a little bit for what they were doing wrong. And so as the church grows and the effect moves on, God will raise up people. But you need to know that when you're in the world-changing business, it can really have an effect on you and everyone you're training. And so it's exciting to be involved in training people and equipping them to do the job. That's exciting. And the church begins to come alive and people begin to step forward, and you can't beat what you're seeing God do. What a wonderful time. But that can lead to backlash. You may end up having to deal with false accusations and slander, attempts to discredit your work. You need to understand that we are in the middle of bringing light to a dark world. And our fight is not with flesh and blood, not with other humans. Though other humans will be the tools used by the devil, you and I need to understand that it's not the human beings that are even saying the words and doing the things. It's the devil. And we don't really teach much or believe much maybe today about Satan indwelling people. But I'll tell you that people you train may spread lies and slander about you. And in a day and time when social media makes it easy to cancel a person, That happened to me back in the early days of the ministry, but there was no way to spread it. Today, it just takes some guys going online and getting an online presence and being willing to be ruthless, and they can take you out. I just want you to know that when you fight hell, hell fights back. I want you to know that when you start seeing lives change and you start mentoring a lot of people, it's not people that are fighting you, but it's the devil fighting you, and you need to be ready for that. And as you train people, if you're not doing it the way it's always been done, that leads to some issues, and that leads to some problems. Because when people start seeing something new, it makes them very uncomfortable. So you have to stay faithful to the truth. You have to continue forward with wisdom and grace and love to help the gospel of Jesus Christ go forward. You can't stop the work of God. No matter what they do, no matter what happens to you, the Lord Jesus will keep the things going forward for his honor and his glory. I have loved being involved in mentoring. I will say that it is the most risky thing you'll ever do. It is, because what will end up happening is people will attack you. Other missionaries may mock you. Other pastors may mock you. You know, whenever you're more successful than the other guy, you may be considered worldly by some. So whatever's going on. And even your mentees may attack you. You need to understand that they may question your qualifications. They may question your experience and your expertise. They may come at you because they want to be involved, and they get to know you. When you're a mentor, you become transparent and vulnerable, and you open yourself up, and they know you. So they know how to take what you've said and twist it and turn it. They know how to spread rumors and gossip if they want to. I've often said, if a man is not strong enough to help you, hurt you, if a man is not strong enough to hurt you, he's not strong enough to help you. So that's the problem. As you do the work of God, you're training people that are strong enough to do you damage. But that's what you've got to do. That's a decision you make. Sometimes they don't like the authority you have, and they want to undermine your position. They want to be sure and pull themselves up by putting you down. They'll ignore the training and the advice that you've given them and whatever you've taught them. They may mock you and belittle you in front of other people. They may do it online. You know, you got keyboard warriors that are just online. And no matter what happens in their life, and no matter what happens in their ministry, no matter if they get a divorce or if they turn on God or anything else, they don't mind using that. And you want to be careful to stay the course and do what's right. They may form cliques and alliances against you. They may manipulate information. They may withhold important details. They may do everything they can to set you up for a failure. Many mentees will want to blame you for their failures. They want to blame you for their setbacks. They don't want to accept personal responsibility. But that can't be what stops you from doing what God's called you to do. There may be others that will use negative influence. You know, if you ever make the wrong person mad, there's no telling what might end up happening, but you've got to make up your mind. That's not my concern. I will do the right thing. I will do the right thing. Sometimes they publicly criticize you. They seek to embarrass you. They set you up for failure. They make unreasonable demands. They retaliate against you because they feel like you hurt them, and so they're going to hurt you. They sabotage the network, the projects, the relationships, the work you're doing. They may easily go about doing that. There will be people in your ministry along the way that will do just what Judas did to Jesus. There'll be people that will come against you and try to ruin you. There'll be people like Korah that came against Moses and rose up against Moses. And God very likely will not open the ground and swallow up your enemies like he has for others. You may be like the Apostle Paul, who will have to publicly call out Alexander Coppersmith, who did him much harm. They may do what they can to push you to the side and marginalize you. I just want you to know that mentoring is so effective that the devil has to fight it. He turns pastors into quite selfish people. They learn and keep it to themselves, only give out what they do in the pulpit. not to risk themselves because they know how to twist your words. They know how to take and distort what you're saying and what you mean and the actions you've taken. They want to maybe harm your reputation or your credibility. They may even form competing groups to fight with you or to rival you. They may complain against you. They may share confidential information in any attempt to embarrass you or discredit you. They may make false accusations, unsubstantiated claims against you. They could even threaten you physically. So I want you to know there's a whole lot of things that could go on if you decide to get involved in mentoring, but it is well worth it. It's funny that Paul would say to Timothy and to the Corinthian church and others that Timothy was the only one who understood him and liked him. It is funny that Paul had so many different people he mentored, but only 2 get a letter. It is funny that even the Apostle Paul had to deal with people that stood against him. So I want to challenge you to mentor, and I'm going to bring you some more thoughts on mentoring. I'm going to try to teach you from the Bible about mentoring a little bit, and I'll do that in further episodes. But I just want you to know this is the most exciting and rewarding, but threatening and dangerous ministry you can have, because you will be setting yourself up out there where people might try to harm you and people may try to cause you problems, but it's worth it. You go on forward for Jesus. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't undo it. I'm excited about what God's done in my life and ministry. And I believe if you'll think about it, you'll be excited about what God's going to do with you. Thank you very much for listening to the World Evangelism Podcast. I am so grateful I have the opportunity to be with you. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. And I hope you'll share it if it's of any value to you. God bless you.